back to the studio today. We're going to be working on another one of the wedges for the Christmas tree Winter Wonderland applique tree skirt. We have block number 3 here showing. This one has some beautiful round trees in the background and a little bird on the top, which is kind of like our little mascot. We don't have a whole lot to do to get ready for that. I already have my wedges cut. So I'm going to pull out one of my wedges. I have all of the applique, which is laser cut and pre-fused in the kit. And as you can see, I did keep my promise, and I have the Winter Wonderland wall hanging quilted. I was able to get that quilted with a pattern called Winter Wonderland, and I believe it's called Becker's Winter Wonderland. That was by Barbara Becker. So we're going to go ahead and get month 3 started on here. The third block in our Winter Wonderland applique tree skirt. I'm going to get everything resituated, and we'll go ahead and get that started. As usual, one of the first things I like to do when I get my pattern out of the packaging, which is beautifully done by the way, is give my pattern a little bit of a press with a dry iron. And I just like to get out any of the deep creases in my pattern so I don't transfer any of those mistakes of the puckering to my background fabric or to my pieces. I want to get those pieces in place as accurately as possible. I also look through my pieces of fabric that have been laser cut and pre-fused to make sure that there aren't any pieces that need to be pressed. Sometimes in the packaging a component is so large that it needs to be folded to be put into the packaging. So I just like to make sure that they all are pressed. If I go ahead and press them with the paper backing on them and let them cool, I can go ahead and peel them later as I need to. So then it's, I really can get ready to move on to the next step, which is layering some of the pieces. Now I always like to look and see some of the pieces will have multiple layers, like this part of the house will be on the background, and then you will have this build out of the front entry and then the door on top of that. And when you have multiple layers of fabric and the fusible, sometimes it's hard to see even with a light box. So I would go ahead and position some of those pieces in place before I even got to the background fabric, and that way I could put them on with confidence knowing that I have them in the right place. And this particular kit says it was packaged by Vicki. Vicki, thank you very much for your accuracy and getting all the components in there. And I'm going to go ahead and set up my light box and see what some of these sub pieces I can put together first before I get to putting them on my background. Also, I've ironed my background. That's important. I've pressed that because I cut that several months ago, and I want to make sure that it's nice and crisp for the placement of my components. But you want to be careful because all of those edges on those wedges are bias, and so they would be very easy to stretch as you were handling them. They would also be easy to distort if you were pressing them too hard, so be careful with that. As I said earlier about the compound pieces, sometimes though they can really build up and it's hard to see where pieces go. So for instance, on this part of the house, I'm going to leave my paper backing on there, but I'm going to go ahead and peel off some of the other components, including this build out. And the bottom of the build out is going to hang off of the house itself, but I'm going to go ahead and peel all the paper off anyway, because I know this Steam-A-Seam 2 is repositionable. Even if that little bit is exposed at the bottom, I know that it's going to stick all right. And I'm sticking my glasses on so I can actually see what I'm doing. Now I'm going to add the door on. And you can start to see pretty quickly what I mean about these compound layers, because when you got, this would be 4 layers at this point, the door, the build out the house, and the background. So doing this ahead of time on as many pieces as you can just helps get the placement correct. And I'm going to have to leave the edge of this foot up a little bit because the rim of the house goes underneath that. But again, this is why the Steam-A-Seam 2 comes in so handy, because it's completely repositionable until you fuse it. Sometimes when you have a shape that has to match exactly like this ridge roof, I like to get the center point there, and then I can use a little bit of pressure to swivel the end piece. I have a little bit of pressure on it, and as soon as I get it right to the edge of the house, then I can go ahead and apply a little bit of pressure and get that down. And now I'm lifting up the 2 bottoms of the feet on my bird, and I can get those in place. And let's see, I can put the window on. And when you're trying to figure out pieces, you can either look at the placement guide or at the color cover sheet. That comes in really handy as well for reminding yourself where something goes. You can always look at the block. The fabric should match exactly what's on the pattern here, and so you can go ahead and see where things go. I'm going to put this little spiral on as well while we're at it. Usually if you put the very tip of this spiral where it goes, you can spiral it out. And I have to get my doorknob on. I just put my little doorknob circle on the placement guide itself because often we will have several of these little black circles. One is going to be for the bird, so I know that I have to keep that one separate. But also sometimes I will lay out my components in regular, in position slightly where they will go so I can keep track. But you can see now I have this whole subunit that I can peel off. This still has its paper, but the rest of them have their paper pulled off, and I can set that aside until I get my background fabric on there. My background fabric is just a solid cone of fabric, so I don't have to worry about a right or a wrong side on that. And once I get this in place on my placement guide, I can go ahead and peel off this huge paper backing off the subunit. And you can see that that will all go into place seamlessly without much confusion. Now I can put in my 2 trees. What would that be? A tree trunk. But the tree component itself, I may have to wait until I get the wedges put together, because this one overlaps. Now this is one piece that I didn't see at the beginning that was folded. So I'm just going to go ahead and iron that piece and let it cool for a few seconds just to make sure there's no crease in there. Sometimes I get ahead of myself and I may place something before another unit goes on, and you can usually tell when something goes underneath another item because part of the item will have dotted lines, like the tree stump. The tree trunk here is dotted line where it goes underneath the canopy of the tree itself. But with the Steam 2, because it's all repositionable, you can get those in place just by lifting them up and putting them back down where you need them. These spirals I've learned to handle delicately, because if you put them in the wrong place, they really could spiral out of control. But if you're careful with them, they'll go right where you need them to go. Let's see what we can put next. This is probably the closest I will come to having a piece blend into my background, but I still really love my background. I'm like really excited about it. Whenever I have berries or leaves that overlap, I like to use the darker of the colors in the background and the lighter the colors on the top, just so that the applique will have a little bit of dimension to it, because darker colors recede and brighter colors come forward. And that just helps with the illusion of the dimensionality of the applique. I always have to place these leaves down. They are another one that can trick me sometimes, because we have left ones and right ones. And sometimes I'm in a hurry, not paying attention, and I get one in the wrong place. And this is our little mascot. And I'm not sure if our mascot has a name. Some of these lighter pieces almost disappear on my ironing board. Some of these things you could fidget with forever. I'm debating whether I should put this on, because it's so close to my seam line, but I'm going to go ahead and do that. These little tiny, this is the little beak for my mascot. This is another piece that always gets me. I imagine some people might be really adept at using tweezers to handle these really small pieces, but I don't think that I would have any better luck with the tweezers than I do with my thumbs, because I still would have to handle the very tiny tweezers themselves. Again, we have a section where we've got 3 different values, and I'm going to use the very darkest one towards the back. Until I get all the way up to the lightest one. And that just helps give a little bit of dimension to the piece. I have this little blue circle, I'm not sure where it goes. It goes on the house, but it wasn't visible on the color cover sheet. So there's a switch for you. It's on the pad, the placement guide, but it isn't actually on the house itself. So they may have either added that or it didn't get put on during the sample process. So that's just something you can keep an eye out for. I'm just going to do these leaves and these berries here, and I will put my tree trunk on, but I'm going to leave the two tree canopies until after I piece the wedges together, just to make sure that I get them both in place so that they overlap, but I don't want to have them get caught up inside the seam allowance. That's one less thing that I'll have to worry about as I'm piecing the wedges together. And you do want to be delicate when you do these wedges, because all of the components, all of the edges are bias cut. So you want to be careful when you're handling those. I'm down to the last few berries. Dark one goes in the back, lighter one to the front. Some of that stickiness transfers to the paper backing, and then it transfers to my fingers. So I have to figure out where this little leaf goes, and I think there's one more berry. Okay, I can see there's a berry right here. Okay, I have those little pieces left over. I'm going to do my tree canopy when I get my wedges together. So I'm going to go ahead and move the light box out of the way and get this section fused in place, and we can put this aside until we get to the actually assembling of the blocks. I have my light box put away, and I have my paper placement guide put away. I'm just going to make sure that all of the pieces are where I need them to be for before I fuse them in place. Make sure that everything is pretty well straight. I'm going to go ahead and fuse this, and I always use just plain water to activate the steaming process in the Steam-A-Seam 2. Just as the name implies, Steam-A-Seam 2 does require the steam component, which is where the product gets its name. I don't generally put water in my iron, and therefore my iron never leaks. What I do like to do is use a Teflon pressing sheet on top of the applique, and that just protects the applique itself, the iron, and my background fabric. I'll just lay this on top, make sure that everything is as it should be, and I'm just going to go ahead and set the iron on there. The iron takes a while to penetrate through the Teflon pressing sheet. It also is going to have to penetrate through all of those compound layers on the components themselves. In some of the sections we had the ridge roof, the house, the build out, the door, and then the door handle. And that's multiple layers of fabric that the heat is going to have to penetrate through, but also multiple layers of Steam-A-Seam 2 that are going to have to be heated up to a point high enough to fuse all of those layers. So I can't tell you exactly how long that's going to take, because everyone's iron is different. We all have different iron brands. We all have different settings on our iron that we might be using. So that's something that you're just going to have to play with a little bit and figure out for yourself. I know that I move the iron a little bit more than I should during the filming, but that's mostly just because I get fidgety. Once I fuse this all the way through all the layers from the front, then I would go ahead and flip my wedge over, and I would iron again from the back, starting with that mister bottle and misting the background fabric, and then re-ironing it so that the heat again can penetrate through all the layers. You can't really overfuse Steam-A-Seam 2. It's not going to dissipate. You could burn your fabric, obviously, which is one of the things that the Teflon pressing sheet helps to prevent. One of the other things that the Teflon pressing sheet does is prevent the edge of the iron from catching the edge of one of the applique shapes, scrunching it over, and then fusing it in place, which would result in a very unappealing block. So those two things protects the fabric, it protects the edges of the applique shapes, and it also obviously protects the iron from getting any Steam-A-Seam 2 that might creep out from under one of the shapes and onto the iron. So after you get all of the different sections done where you feel like you've done a good job of fusing it, you could go ahead and flip your block over and repeat that process with the steam. And you can see this hasn't fused long enough because it's still damp. So I will make sure that I get this good before I move on. And then we'll go ahead and show you what the block looks like, and we can set this one aside for the assembly section of this process. And you can see that the blocks go together really quickly. This is something that you could do with your family as a little family project if you had younger ones that wanted to help. And depending on their skill level, you could determine yourself what would be safe for them to do. They could just help you lay out the pieces in a puzzle-like shape that looks similar to the cover. They could help you peel some of the paper backing off. In my case, the paper peels off very easily here, but that may be due to my climate. If they're a little bit older and adept with an iron, they could use the pressing cloth and the iron. Most kids like to play with water, so if they can't handle the iron, maybe they could help you spritz the blocks in place before you iron it. They could be in charge of putting these blocks in a safe place in between working on the different blocks. And I think by bringing in family members to work on these projects, it also makes the product a little bit more memorable for them. They might remember working on this with their uncle or their aunt or their great-grandmother, and it would become more of a memento. It would have more of a meaning than just a tree skirt that ended up under the tree one year. And part of the process of doing these things is not only to create a project, but it's also to build a memory. So that's it for this portion of the block of the month, the Christmas tree skirt, Winter Wonderland. It's an applique with a laser cut and pre-fused applique components. I am really excited about the background. I love it. Has kind of a retro feel to it, this color, but also kind of a modern, fresh take on a green. I'm really excited the way the batik pops on that background, so I'm really thrilled with this fabric choice. Everything is looking really good, so I can't wait to actually get all of the wedges done, get those together and fill in some of those little missing overlapping pieces, and then get it quilted. Getting this quilted may seem like a little bit of a challenge because of its circular shape and that split in the middle, but we're going to tackle that together. Look forward to seeing you next time, and until then, be good.